All right, we're on. All right, so hi everyone. Our group studied the effects of a token economy on exercise adherence. John, can you change the slide? Okay, so most people know about the benefits of exercise. It's not exactly a well-kept secret. It has been speculated that physical activity could help promote health-related behaviors and symptoms since before 2500 BC, where it was a common belief held in ancient China. Thanks to a multitude of studies about exercise and physical activity, we now know for sure that it's extremely important. It probably won't surprise you, but exercise is one of the most commonly prescribed remedies for health-related issues. It can decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, and cancer. It also can alleviate the symptoms of those diseases. And not only is exercise important for our bodies, it's also important for our minds. It's been proven to help with psychological well-being, reducing anxiety, stress, and depression. And most importantly for us grad school students, exercise can improve memory and general cognitive functioning, so maybe helping us get those A's on our tests. And it can even help us sleep better at night, another side effect that's very important. One study we found in our research demonstrated the effects of exercise adherence among a group of middle-aged and older men and women. It wasn't a behaviorally based research article, so they used a group design with a control and an experimental group. All of the participants in the experimental group recorded their daily exercise in a journal. They wrote about the type of exercise they performed, how long they performed it for, and how high their heart rate got during the exercise routine. However, IOA was not calculated in this study, so bear that in mind. When the participants adhered to their exercise plans, a behaviorally trained interventionist reinforced them, and those that had the highest rates of exercise adherence found that their body pain was lessened, they had overall greater health, increased vitality, and improved exercise self-efficacy. And you can switch to the next slide.
Is it showing?
The second literature review slide with the people running.
Yeah.
Thank you. And again, we all know that we should be exercising, but it's way easier said than done. Lack of motivation, lack of time, lack of ability are all excuses that we've given in the past for why we don't exercise or adhere to our exercise plans. There are proven strategies to help us stay on track when we're exercising, which allows those benefits of exercise that we previously discussed to flourish. Research shows that you should switch up your exercise routine, varying what you do in each exercise session. There's also empirical evidence that having a workout buddy can increase the likelihood that you stick to an exercise plan. Even if you can't find someone who wants to go to the gym with you, having an exercise role model or just a generally positive social support system in your everyday life can help. Another way to increase exercise is to remove those commonly cited barriers to exercise. So one study showed that most people said that lack of time and transportation were the biggest hindrances to physical activity. So you should always have a flexible exercise schedule and use modified exercise plans. Maybe plans that can be executed in your home or your neighborhood fairly quickly. And for the tech savvy, there is mobile health technology. These are apps that can help you track your daily exercise and give you reinforcing feedback, encouragement for self-monitoring, and motivating messages. So exercise is a behavior. It's something that we do. It's observable, it's measurable. So using a behavior modification strategy is only logical. And one such behavioral strategy could be the token economy. And then can you change the slide?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, John. So token economies are a common reinforcement strategy used in applied behavior analysis. There's significant empirical support for their use among a wide range of populations and behaviors. So in a token economy, a point or a token is received contingent on a target behavior. The tokens can then be later exchanged for backup reinforcers, which can be anything ranging from tangibles, activities, privileges. So you might want to think about it like earning money from work and then using that money to buy the things that you want and need. They're not new to the ABA scene. Token economies have been used since the 1800s, and there's been empirical support since about 1965. Since then, it's only become more well established in the literature. Token economies are also great because of all of their benefits. To mention a few, they're really easy to use. A teacher or a therapist could carry tokens in their pocket so that they could give them out quickly and without disrupting the environment or the target behavior. So if a student is working diligently on their math worksheet, you could give them a token without stopping that behavior. Whereas if you reinforced it with a break or a toy, you might have to stop them from doing that work. So teachers love this part, so it makes the intervention very acceptable to those who deliver it. And since the tokens can be carried around to different rooms, places, and settings, the behavior can be very easily generalized. Another great thing about token economies is that they're not usually affected by motivating operations because the tokens can be exchanged for a variety of reinforcers. So if a child just has lunch, they may not want that piece of candy, but maybe they'll want the cool toy. Lastly, token economies are really flexible and customizable. They can be arranged to fit the needs of a particular individual, a particular environment, or a particular behavior quite easily. Everyone can receive a different number of tokens. You can get 3 tokens for a hard task, 1 token for an easy task, and each learner can have different backup reinforcers that are effective for them. So token economies are great for groups because of the flexibility and how feasible they are, which opens up the possibility that they could be used on a group of individuals looking to increase exercise. And you can change the slide.
Okay, so we found a good deal of research in terms of token economies within the last 10 years. We found first an article called The Effects of Item Preference and Token Reinforcement on Sharing Behavior Exhibited by Children with Autism Spectrum Disorder by Gilly and Ringdahl. 2 studies were conducted in this one. The first was to determine whether high preference items would take more prompting to share than other less preferred items. For 2 of the 4 participants, more prompted was required in order for them to share their high preference items. And the second study, which is most significant for our purposes, then implemented a token economy for independent sharing for the 2 participants that had difficulty sharing high preference items. IOA was collected for at least 33% of the sessions. An agreement was defined as both observers marking the same level of prompting required to complete sharing for a given trial. Inter-observer agreement was calculated by counting the number of agreements for a session and dividing it by the number of agreements and disagreements and multiplying it by 100. Agreement was between 90% and 100% depending on the condition and the participant, but ultimately the study showed that the token economy was effective in increasing the percent of trials that the 2 participants shared high preference items independently. And then in the next article, which is kind of a really cool one, I thought, is called Evaluating the Role of Contingency in Differentially Reinforced Tick Suppression by Heil, Woods, and Lee Vu. And a token economy was implemented to see if the ticks of participants with Tourette syndrome would decrease. 3 conditions were implemented: a baseline condition, a suppression with a DRO, and a suppression with non-contingent reinforcement. For the suppression with a DRO, participants were told if they suppressed their ticks for 10-second trials, they would earn a token after the 10 seconds. The tokens could then be cashed in later. In the non-contingent reinforcement condition, the participants were told they would receive a token whether they suppressed their ticks or not. Inter-observer agreement was calculated for all sessions using a frequency within interval method. Mean inter-observer agreement was 74% for one participant, 92% for another, 86% for a third, and 78% for the last. So in the end, the suppression with the DRO condition was the most effective, as 3 out of 4 of the participants' ticks greatly reduced to near 0 levels. So those are kind of 2 articles that we use to show how token economies could be used with more general behaviors. But then we looked at literature within the last 10 years for token economies and physical activity, and there are some significant studies. Allstott was one who he conducted two different ones. One was in 2012. He looked at the jump roping behavior of typically developing third graders. An alternating treatments design was used with baseline and token economy sessions alternating. Peers were taught to evaluate each other in what were successful jump rope sessions. And during token economy sessions, peers would give the jump ropers tokens. IOA was assessed for 30% of the sessions. Percentage agreement was calculated by dividing the total number of agreements by the total number of agreements plus disagreements and multiplying by 100. Overall, the agreement was 95.9%. And so at the end of the study, it was determined that the token economy sessions were effective in increasing the number of successful jump rope trials for 9 out of 10 students. In a similar study, so again, it's by the same author, he conducted that one in 2015 and looked at the overhand throws of typically developing second grade students. And again, the students were taught to evaluate their peers, completing the steps of a successful overhand throw. For each step that was completed correctly, students would give their peers a token, and students could cash in their tokens at any time or save them up for larger items. When the token economy was implemented, students showed a sudden improvement in their overhand throws. The components performed correctly across students improved minimally by 2 components for each session. Additionally, the distance that the students threw increased when the token economy was implemented. IOA was calculated for 27% of the sessions. Percentage agreement was calculated by dividing the total number of agreements by the total number of agreements plus disagreements and multiplying by 100. Overall, the agreement was 91.8% rather, and overall, the peer implemented token economy was successful in improving student overhand throws. And then in our last article that we found called Using Token Reinforcement to Increase Walking for Adults with Intellectual Disabilities by Krentz, Miltenberger, and Valbuena, used the token economy to increase the amount of walking adult men with intellectual disabilities engaged in every day. The participants went outside for an hour each day, and cones were placed 50 meters away from each other. The participants were told they could walk the full hour, take breaks, or just opt out. For each 50-meter lap they completed, they would earn a token that could be cashed in for highly preferred items that were previously assessed. IOA was conducted for 38% of the sessions. It was calculated by dividing the smaller number of laps by the larger number of laps and converting the result to a percentage. Agreement was 99.6% for participant 1, 99.6% for participant 2, 100 for participant 3, 99.8 for participant 4, and 99.9 for participant 5. The implementation of the token economy showed an increase in the number of laps for all 5 participants. Thus, it was deemed effective. So these studies are significant for us because they show that token economies can be implemented for a variety of behaviors, from sharing to tick suppression to physical activity. Token economies have been proven to be effective across a variety of populations, from typically developing children to adults with developmental disabilities, as well as Tourette syndrome, in that case with the ticks. Like Catherine said, token economies can be easy to implement, as even shown by peer administration. So you can teach typically developing peers how to administer tokens, and that can be successful. So that brings us to the article that we selected for our group project, which was a token economy for exercise adherence in pediatric cystic fibrosis, a single subject analysis by Bernard, Cohen, and Moffitt. A token economy was chosen to determine if it would be effective in increasing exercise for children with cystic fibrosis. This was significant because lack of exercise could lead to pulmonary difficulties in patients with cystic fibrosis, which could ultimately lead to death. So they were really looking at ways to improve just their health overall. The inclusionary criteria for the study were: 1, they were a child with cystic fibrosis; 2, exercise was recommended medically; 3, participants did not adhere to exercise routines regularly; 4, they did not engage in non-school related exercise for more than 2 times a week for 20 minutes each; and 5, they had forced expiratory volume in the mildly impaired range. So after using the inclusionary criteria, 3 participants were found: 3 Caucasian girls, 2 12-year-olds, and 1 8-year-old. Exercise was determined individually for each participant by the physical therapist, and they didn't specify what the physical exercise was for each participant. Exercise diaries were used to record the frequency, type, and duration of exercise during non-school hours. Pedometer readings were also recorded, as well as how long the pedometer was worn for. The pedometers were used to verify that the participants' exercise was increasing. So during baseline phase, the procedures were explained and consent was obtained. The types of exercise that could be completed were explained, as well as how to use the exercise diaries and pedometers. The treatment phase then had two parts, training and implementation. For training, the experimenter went over to the participants' houses for 3 two-hour sessions. Parents were trained on how to implement the token economy. The target amount of exercise was 4 times a week for 20 minutes. When the child engaged in exercise, they would earn a small immediate reward, such as a preferred snack or a small amount of money. The child would also earn a point for every 10 minutes they engaged in exercise. These points could then be exchanged for larger prizes predetermined by the child, the parents, and the experimenters. Examples of these cash-ins were staying up late, 30 minutes past bedtime, or choosing a movie to go see. After training about implementation, proper exercise, diet, and answering any questions, the treatment was then implemented. The implementation part of the study was to determine whether the token economy would be effective in increasing the amount of exercise the children engaged in. An ABAB design was used, so after treatment, a return to baseline phase was implemented. Therefore, the children did not receive any reinforcement for exercising then. And then once they returned to treatment, the token economy was put back into place. And then follow-ups were conducted at 1 month and 3 months. IOA was not specifically reported, but integrity checks were implemented by checking the exercise diaries and the participants' pedometers. The experimenter checked to see if the information was reported accurately by comparing the child-parent reports to the information stored in the pedometer readings. All 3 participants demonstrated a higher average daily pedometer reading during the treatment phase than the baseline phases. And the information from the pedometers matched the reports by 0.1 miles for all participants, so it's pretty close. The initial treatment phase showed an increase from baseline for all 3 participants. When the reversal phase was implemented, 2 of the participants' exercise levels went back down to near baseline levels. The other participants' exercise was not tracked on the return to baseline phase because they chose to engage in activities that couldn't be tracked by pedometer, like swimming. That participant particularly liked to swim, and so she wasn't able to wear a pedometer there. Return to treatment showed another increase for all 3 participants. The 1 month and 3 month follow-ups showed decreases in exercise activity. However, they were all still exercising more than during either baseline phase. Therefore, it showed a long-term maintenance of increased exercise. Ultimately, the strengths of this study included that it began to provide literature around exercise adherence for patients with cystic fibrosis. It was an easy intervention for parents to learn and implement, kind of like how Catherine was talking about. Teachers could use it easily. Parents could also do so as well. And that token economies don't take much time to implement. The limitations of the study include a small sample size, only Caucasian females, girls were participated in the study. The amount of parent encouragement could have varied across phases because it occurred in their homes. And so there was also less control of parent behavior because the study was obviously conducted in their homes, and so researchers weren't there 24/7. Despite these limitations, token economies appear to be successful as an intervention in exercise adherence programs. So therefore, the purpose of our study was to replicate the effects of the token economy in a group of graduate school students.
So for our study, we had to modify it quite a bit, just being that the original study had some variables that we needed to change. So for our operational definition, we defined exercise as being defined as steps, which is the movement of the legs so that one foot is placed in front of the other. The steps were calculated by a pedometer, and the non-examples of exercise would include any exercise that did not involve stepping, such as lifting weights or yoga. The participant demographics are pictured on the right. They varied between 5 females and 1 male of all varying ages and in different locations of the United States. Settings vary to each individual participant's everyday activities in their home, worksite, other areas of their daily living. For the design, we stuck to the original reversal design, so ABAB, in order to demonstrate a functional relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. A return to baseline was implemented after a minimum of 5 stable data points, with a predictable pattern, and that varied for each participant until they had their trend. The second baseline phase was identical to the first baseline phase in that participants tracked steps using pedometers, recorded what type of exercise was done and for how long, and IOA was conducted. During the second baseline phase, participants were not able to earn tokens, but were able to use any that they had previously earned. We will be conducting a second intervention phase after stable baseline. Materials needed, we used Fitbits, iPhones, Apple Watches, fitness trackers, or health apps, and that varied among participants. Exercise diaries, which kept track of our steps, and then also the individualized reinforcement menus for token economy. So for data collection procedures, we collected data on the number or frequency of steps per day through the use of fitness trackers, and participants wore the tracker, used the app throughout the day. IOA, we conducted total count IOA through the use of photos uploaded daily to a shared daily drive, showing the number of steps on the participant's chosen tracker. Another participant compared the claimed number of steps to the photo evidence and conducted IOA for their peer. Participants also uploaded dated photos of them receiving the reinforcement as proof of treatment integrity. The steps of treatment integrity were that each member gave themselves the immediate reward for taking steps above their baseline average, and that they cashed in the points for a later, bigger reward.
Okay, so getting to the results of our study, similar to the original study, we conducted IOA on 30% of sessions, which were daily step counts. And IOA was calculated using total count IOA, meaning that the total count recorded by each observer was collected per measurement period, again, was 1 day. And then the smallest count was divided by the largest count and then multiplied by 100 to reach their percentage. Participants submitted pictures of whatever pedometers that they chose to use. If it was just on our phones, they just submitted it directly as a file upload, or they would take pictures of their watches or whatever pedometers that were used, and then submit it into a group document so that each participant could view and verify the results. Random sessions were collected for IOA, and then IOA was calculated to be 100% due to the data collection method that we used. And then also there was 100% treatment fidelity tracked across all steps. And the images shown are just images of various cash-ins that participants used. Some would cash in for a meal out, or one cash in for gummy bears, as you can see. And then here is our graph of our results. As you can see, there is a lot of variety among the results, and I'm going to dissect that in a minute. So I'll just give a second to look at the graph. Each participant is in a different color, and here's the legend at the bottom. So looking back at the graph, here's some of the basic notes that I could see just from visual analysis of all the participants. Participant 1 showed the strongest effects of the token economy during the treatment phase. And then participants 2, 4, and 6 also showed positive effects, but the effects varied across. I think participant 4 showed just a very slight change during treatment phase. 2 and 6 showed a mild change. Then participant 3 actually showed reverse effects for average daily steps. Her daily steps were actually lower in the treatment phase and were about the same level during both baseline and reverse to baseline phase. Participant 5 showed a declining in average of steps from phase to phase. So their highest was actually in the initial baseline and then decreased in treatment, then decreased again in the return to baseline. And then also I know that participants 1, 4, and 6 showed an increase in treatment, and then the return to baseline showed lower averages in the first baseline phase, which could show an impact on maintenance of the treatment.
So I was participant 1. This is my data table. It also has all of the averages and ranges for each phase. I wasn't able to return back to token economy due to time constraints, but those are the 3 phases I did. And I'm going to discuss them all in more detail with the graph on the next slide. So as you can see, my baseline data was really variable, very unstable. Most of my steps were taken during my work day because I work in a pretty large high school with a student that switches classes, and she also has jobs around the school where we walk a lot. A lot of steps were accounted for that. So on days when I didn't go to work, like weekends, holidays, snow days, I didn't walk as much. So that accounts for those low dips you can see. And partway through baseline, I began training for a half marathon. So many of the high points in baseline intervention were due to runs for training. So if you take a look at my baseline, again, you can see it's unstable, but for the purposes of continuing the study, I switched to the token economy phase. I took the average of my baseline phase steps, which was 9,548 per day, and I gave myself a point for every 1,500 steps over that baseline average. So in the intervention phase, I earned 32 points towards my token economy. Those points were earned over 12 days out of my 17 days of intervention. Each day ranged from receiving 0 to 5 points. My immediate reinforcer was 3 gummy bears per point, and I also cashed in 27 of the points on 3 times going out to eat, 1 helping of chips and salsa, and a serving of Girl Scout cookies. But I did run out of time to cash in my last 5 points. On average, I took 2,358 more steps per day in intervention than in baseline. And as you can see, the peaks in my intervention phase are much higher than the peaks in baseline. So there is an effect there. Once I saw a clear increase in steps during my intervention phase, I returned back to baseline. And in the return to baseline phase, I took 4,830 less steps per day on average than in treatment. So obviously that's a really clear decrease, and it's a really nice demonstration of a functional relationship on my graph. But the phase was only 4 days long due to time constraints. And those 4 data points were taken on days when I wasn't at work due to a holiday break. So the return to baseline may be skewed and not exactly representative of what would have happened if I had time to collect more data.
And I'm participant 2, and here's just the depiction of my daily step counts. The baseline range was a little under 3,000 and a little over 6,000. And you can see the average and all the ranges displayed there. And then I'm going to go into more detail with my graph on the following slide. So similar to Catherine's, I had a very unstable baseline and just highly variable. And because we did not, due to time constraints, we were trying to get some 5 stable baseline points before moving to treatment, but I had to move on to treatment phase due to the lack of time. So again, in treatment phase, there is some high variability in the beginning, but it kind of stables out a little bit towards the end, and you can see an increasing trend at the end. And then in the revert to baseline, again, like Catherine's, there's a nice drop there, which shows some of the effects of the token economy. However, there's an outlier in the middle of there, and that was due to working at a school that day. So I was required to walk around more that day, and the children changed classes a lot. So that definitely affected my steps for that day. So then for mine, I earned 1 point for every 750 steps over baseline. I picked this number because my overall baseline was very low. So I picked a lower number just to increase success. Across the treatment phase, I earned 25 points. I earned points in 10 out of 12 phases. There were a couple points that were too low to achieve points. And then I exchanged, I believe it was 10 points for a night out to dinner with my wife, which was the pizza depicted in the previous slide. And during the treatment phase, I calculated my increase in average to be about 1,713 steps from baseline, and then the return to baseline, the decrease was about 1,836.
Okay, so I was participant 3, and as you can see, my average baseline was pretty high, and then the rest of them were a lot lower than my average baseline, which I will go into detail in my next slide. So my baseline data was very unstable. My steps were taken mostly during my workday, which does not consist a lot of walking. I work about an hour away from my house and see clients at homes and at my center. So most of my day is spent in my car. My steps were high during the end of my baseline phase because I was vacationing in Washington, D.C., and that consisted a lot of walking per day. So from baseline to token economy, my steps decreased 3,732. This was because I started the token economy phase the day after I got back from Washington, D.C. During my token economy phase, I earned a point for every 500 steps over my baseline average, which was 6,995. During this phase, I only earned 3 points with an immediate reward of a cup of coffee. I earned these points over a 15-day period. Due to time constraints, I had to go to return to baseline phase. From the token economy phase to the return to baseline phase, my steps increased by 227 steps. As you can see, my data was very unstable and all over the place. If I hadn't done so much walking in Washington, D.C., my average would have been lower, so I might have earned some more points for my rewards. So that was definitely considered a limitation in my data.
Alrighty, and I was participant number 4. Like everyone else, my baseline data was pretty unstable as well. On my graph, you can see a very big outlier, and that outlier was due to an exceptionally nice day where my family and I went on a walk through a national park. My baseline and intervention averages also differed immensely day to day due to my clients' absences from work. On days where my clients were absent, I was helping with supervisee tasks on the computer, therefore not moving much. I also did not wear my Fitbit on the weekends during baseline, so I stuck with that routine throughout the intervention and return to baseline in order to keep consistent data collection. My return to baseline step frequency has seemed to reduce quite significantly once I returned to baseline. I believe this is due to the outlier data from initial baseline and sedentary periods due to illness. For my token economy, I wanted to do 1 point for every 1,000 steps over my baseline average, which was 8,125 steps. I earned 6 points total over 10 days with an immediate reward of 1 can of ginger ale. For the token economy, I increased by 340 steps on average. And on my return to baseline, I actually decreased by 2,681 steps on average, which is a pretty big reduction.
I am participant 5. My baseline average was pretty high compared to treatment and return to baseline, and I'll get more into that when you turn to my graphs, John. Thank you. So as everyone else said, my baseline was unstable. For baseline, I was taking a Zumba class, so I was a little bit more active. During the treatment phase, I got the flu, so I have a few days where my steps were pretty low. I was just kind of lounging around the house. And then for return to baseline, my steps were also low. We had to stop taking data due to time constraints, so I only have a few data points for that one. I got 200 points for every, well, I got 1 point for every 200 steps over baseline, which was 4,168, and I earned 6 points total. From baseline to treatment, I decreased 339 steps, and from treatment to return to baseline, I decreased 678 steps. Next slide.
Okay, I'm participant 6. My baseline average was 3,994.3, so close to that 4,000 mark. But then during the token economy, my average went up to 5,022. And then as you can see from this, the return to baseline, my average dropped even more significantly than my original baseline. So if you can go to my graph, John. My baseline it's not quite as unstable as other people. Initially, the highest point during my baseline, I sometimes go and work in a school, and so that particular day, just based on meetings and everything, I had to walk around the school a bit more. But then, as you can see, the last 4 or 5 data points become more stable. And then during the treatment phase, or when the token economy was implemented. There's one low point. I believe that day was a snow day, so I wasn't out and about. I wasn't working really, just around the house, and that's why that accounts for being lower. And so I earned 1 point for every 500 steps over baseline average. Kind of like John, I decided on a lower amount just because my baseline wasn't that high. I earned 18 points across 11 days. I cashed in once to go out to eat, once for an iced latte, and then I believe I still had like 3 or 4 points left over. And then my baseline to token economy, I increased 1,028 steps, and then my return to token economy was significant again. So for me, it showed that the token economy was pretty successful and effective.
So for the conclusion, the overall objective of this study was to determine whether a token economy reinforcement system was effective for increasing the number of steps taken each day. The results showed that the token economy somewhat increased the amount of steps taken throughout the day. Each participant had unstable data due to time constraints, as well as having different point systems for their token economy. To compare steps throughout each phase, averages were calculated, and from baseline to token economy stage, most of the participants' steps increased. Each participant used a different system to earn tokens. Most used an edible reinforcer during the token economy phase and also cashed in tokens for a bigger reward. The results of the study showed that a token economy mostly increased the steps that each participant took on a daily basis. Of the 6 participants in the study, participant 1 demonstrated the highest amount of effectiveness in the token economy. She earned the most points throughout the token economy phase. From baseline to token economy, her steps increased by 2,358 steps. She earned 32 points over the 12 days, 12 out of the 17 days during the token economy. This showed that token economy was effective for her. Participant 2 earned 25 points out of the 12 days of the token economy phase. He increased his steps by 1,713 from his baseline to token economy. He decreased his steps by 1,836 steps. So this also concluded that the token economy was effective because his steps increased with the result of a reward. However, participant 3, on the other hand, demonstrated a higher baseline average than in the token economy and return to baseline state phase. This would be a limitation of the study because there was a decrease rather than increase for token economy. Unlike participant 1 and 2, participant 3 had a decrease of steps from baseline to token economy by 3,732 steps. So this showed that the token economy phase was not as effective for this participant as it was for others. Participant 4 increased her steps from baseline to token economy by 347 steps. She earned 6 points within 10 days with an immediate reward of ginger ale. Her steps decreased from token economy to return to baseline by 2,681 steps. So it wasn't as effective as others as well. Participant 5 had a token economy that was effective because she increased her steps from token economy to baseline data. Participant 6 earned 18 points over 11 days with a reward of going out to eat. From baseline to token economy, the participant increased her steps by 1,028 steps. She decreased her steps by 2,075 from return to baseline to token economy. So in addition to participants 1, 2, and 5, this showed that the token economy was effective for this participant. So from the results, token economy somewhat does increase the amounts of steps taken by an individual. Having a reward system is an effective way to increase steps, although some participants had lower points than others, overall it was effective. There was some functional relationship between all group members due to everyone obtaining a token. A strength of the study that it was single subject design was used, so this allows an in-depth understanding of each participant. Another strength of the study was that the point system of each participant was easy to use. Fitbits, Apple Watches, and iPhones were a tool that was easy to keep track of each participant's steps. So it was pretty effective for most of the participants.
For limitations, we all use something different to track our steps. For example, I use my iPhone. I know some of the participants used a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or a health app. We all had unstable baseline data, and we had to hurry up and switch to treatment phase due to time constraints. The return to baseline was also shortened due to time constraints. Each person had various life events happen, like Angela went to DC and I had the flu, so that made a difference in our daily step count. We also picked how long we were going to record our steps each day. So I recorded my steps between 8:15 and 9 o'clock, but another participant could have did noon until 8:30 p.m. And one participant also didn't track her steps on the weekend. She only did Monday through Friday. Next slide.
So at this point, there's like 3 or 4 slides worth of our references. They include the ones that we used in our literature review and our original study. And then after following these references, it shows our contribution log for each group member.
Okay, that's great. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. When you guys submit this, can you just also submit a copy of your slides when you upload it onto the discussion board? That way, I think, because it was just a little small, so then I can maybe other people will be able to see it a little bit better. I have a couple questions and a couple comments. But overall, very nice job, all of you guys. This is a neat study, and some of you some really nice results with the token economy. One question, you guys probably hit it. So was the length of each day different for each participant, and you guys were able to set how long each day you were going to be tracking steps? Okay, so was there a minimum amount of time each day that, like, for one person they only tracked it for 4 hours and another one tracked it for 12? Or how did you guys do that? And I guess what I also want to say is just whenever you set a time for a participant, was that the same time then for like the rest of the intervention, or would it vary depending on the day?
I think that we each probably did it a little differently. I know personally for me, I tracked it on a Fitbit. So it takes my steps from when I wake up in the morning to when I go to bed at night.
Okay.
So for me, my time frame each day was slightly different depending on how long I was awake for that day.
Okay. So for you, it was just the step count for the entire day.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's how I did mine as well. I had a Fitbit, and from the time I woke up till the time I went to bed, it just calculated my steps that way.
Okay.
I think for the most part, our times do vary, but I don't think anyone had like only a 4-hour period. For the most part, it was across a whole day. It was just about, what time you put on the Fitbit or the Apple Watch and what time you took it off at night, which varied. And so that's why we considered it a limitation, because it did differ.
Okay. And so probably the minimum was about an 8-hour period or so across the day.
Probably.
Okay. And so a number of you guys mentioned that your data were unstable. But when I look at the graph, to me, it actually doesn't look that unstable. And so I think like what's tricky about single subject design is that you're typically doing visual inspection of your graphs. Mm-hmm. And you have to try to determine, how stable is it to be able to go into a treatment phase. And you didn't have a specific criteria, did you, of what your stability criteria would have been?
No.
Okay. So, with steps, most likely you're going to have some variability. And I think just in general, you want to, what's even more important than the variability, and you guys did a really good job pointing out certain points of variability and what may have caused it, is really looking at the trends to see, do you have data that are going in the direction that you expect the data to go in the intervention, or is it going the opposite direction? So a lot of times, as long as you have data that are heading in either the opposite direction. So if you're expecting the data to go up and you see a decreasing trend, it's not so problematic. But if you have data that are heading in that direction of what you expect the data to go once you've implemented your intervention, then you want to probably keep it in baseline. And so if you're looking at 500 steps above and 500 steps below, that's actually considered relatively stable. And so I think for even some of the other groups, it'll be interesting to see what their data look like, because you're going to expect some amount of variability. And I think probably some of you guys may have even stayed in baseline longer than you really needed to. But I think it just takes some practice in implementing this type of research to kind of come up with what that criteria is going to be. And sometimes, and different people will use different criteria. So some folks will actually draw almost like a trend line and come up with like a median split, and they'll look to see if they have half of their data points above and half of them below. And then make a determination of if it seems to be stable enough before they would go in. But I really do think a lot of times it's a case-by-case scenario. So if you're dealing with a really challenging behavior and you need to implement your intervention quickly, sometimes you'll implement it even a little bit sooner than you would maybe want to, because the data are a little bit more variable. So that was just sort of interesting, because you guys, a number of you commented that it looked unstable. And honestly, to me, Victoria's was really the data that looked the most unstable, because you see that there's big ranges in some of the high and the low data points that are in baseline compared to some of the other participants. Okay, for your treatment integrity, you guys reported to be 100%, but how did you guys calculate that?
So does treatment integrity one where we took the pics and sent it to each other. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So we took the pictures, and then we all received them on like our group me text. So we all like cross-checked them to make sure like everyone had the tokens that to like in order to exchange them. So we said that there were 2 steps to our treatment. That was getting an immediate reinforcer for whatever number of steps it will be, baseline average. And also the second step would be those tokens for something larger. So we calculated across both of those, and it was 100% for both steps.
So you took pictures of both of the boards and showing that you both had some of the short term or the and the long term.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. We'd also created a Google document that had our token reinforcers like menu. And also just stated our averages, so then we could also cross-check that it was above the average that we had set. So,
okay. And did any of you cheat?
No.
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 Ever.
We were pretty honest.
You did not restrict yourself of that cup of coffee, or you didn't cave once?
No.
No, it was hard. It was
so hard.
It was very hard.
About treatment integrity
Yeah.
for a project like this. I mean,
right.
You can, we're kind of on the honor system here, but a lot of folks in previous groups have even mentioned like, okay, well, I didn't go and buy myself a hat, but I went and bought myself some pants, or something like that. And so it's really hard when you're implementing your own reinforcement system. It really requires some self-control, and you have to be able to not just swap out what your reinforcer is with something that's equivalent. For those of you where the economy wasn't effective, and I would assume, for me, one can of ginger ale is just not going to cut it. There's going to have to be something that's a little bit stronger, motivating for me. But for those of you who wasn't effective, what do you think you could have done differently to make it a little bit more of an effective intervention?
Well, for me, I think that if I maybe, tried to be more aware of my steps and kind of just maybe like walked on a treadmill or did something a little bit more physically active, I could have had a higher token economy. Well,
what reinforcer would have made it worth it for you?
I guess some shopping, because I really love to shop.
And a lot of folks who ended up doing a similar study in the past, they said it would really matter where the money was coming from. Because if it's coming out of my own pocket, it's not going to be nearly as motivating as if it's coming from an experimenter.
Right.
Anyone else?
Too, just maybe putting more thought and consideration into the reinforcers I chose. So at the beginning, we were just kind of stating things that we thought maybe were probably simple and things that maybe were appealing to us that day. But over the course of weeks, it gets kind of redundant to get a cup of ginger ale every day. So yeah, I think just kind of placing more importance on actually what we chose.
I definitely think it's really hard to pick reinforcers for yourself for a token economy. I have a harder time picking reinforcers for a token economy for myself than for my clients.
Well, yeah. And, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like the delayed discount function and the difference. Have you guys seen the marshmallow experiment with kids? Like in terms, you can get one marshmallow right away, but if you wait, you can get 2 marshmallows. And so it's almost like for you guys, you had these tiers, so you could, right? There were some could cash in early, and then others options where you could save up and then get sort of a more potent reward or a higher value reward. So for you guys, and I don't remember if you hit this or not, for those of you who were able to successfully earn reinforcers, what did you guys typically choose to get? Did you guys end up cashing in early, or did you try to store it up?
I personally stored mine up. So like going out to eat was my highest value reinforcer. And so I had to save up 8 points in order to be able to go out to eat. And so I was able to do that. And then also for my second one, I chose to get a latte, which I marked as 6 points. I think our range was 1 through 8. So I really waited in order to cash in for mine.
When I made my token economy, I was being a bit of a baby, and I made definitely my most potent reinforcer 6 points instead of 8 points because I wanted to. So I cashed mine in for going out to eat like most of the time. But it's still because it was easy to attain the 6 points. So like they're like, all right, I know I want to go out to eat with my boyfriend tomorrow. Like I'm gonna go run 2 miles and get my 1,500 over. So that kind of works.
But on the flip side of that, yours was actually the strongest in the token economy. So
you had your motivation.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, maybe because it was easy to attain.
I've some of these other projects where sometimes the bar is just set way too high.
Yeah.
Some of the other folks I've seen do like some studies where they set the bar way too low, and to the point where like how did they do it? They were supposed to increase distance, and you would have to increase your criteria, but they would increase it by 0.25 miles or something, like a very modest increase so that they'd be able to hit it, as opposed to setting the criteria so high that then they wouldn't be able to earn their reinforcers. So in some ways it's great to keep things very individualized, but it's interesting to see how much people will push themselves when it comes to, you know, exercise interventions. Anybody else in terms of like whether they held out and waited for the higher value reinforcers?
I was only able to cash in points one time because my data just kept going like, phew.
Yeah. So you did it one time?
Yep. I didn't get a lot of reinforcement.
Okay. Well, what would have changed it for you other than getting the flu? That probably really was tough. But in terms of a reinforcer that may have made a better, more of an impact.
If I was spending somebody else's money, definitely.
Okay.
I just wasn't like super motivated towards the end. Like I wasn't taking Zoom anymore. I was just kind of lazy. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Anybody else? Any final comments? Okay. Well, you guys did a very nice job. And I just want to remind you to submit both PowerPoint slides and the video onto the discussion board. And also, I don't know if this is in the instructions for the group presentations, but we've done it last semester anyway. If you guys respond to any questions that your peers have, please do your regular 3 posts. So you have to, you know, respond to 3, or you can submit the one of you has to submit the link to the video as one of your posts. But if you give some additional feedback based on questions and you field some of those questions, you can also get an extra like bonus point or an extra credit point for giving some additional responses on top of those 3. So take advantage of that if you'd like. And I think that's pretty much it. But thank you guys very, very much. And I hope you enjoy the